First of all, we of course have to understand how authentication works. And with that, I don't mean that users have to enter their email and password and log in, but how it technically works behind the scenes. For that, it helps if we think about how our web application, or how any web application, works. We have a client, which would be our browser, the user using the browser, and we have a server. Now, when the user enters his credentials, so the email and password, then this authentication data is sent to a server where that data is validated. We can't do that validation in the browser because all the JavaScript code in the browser is exposed to our users and therefore not stored securely, and the logic there could be changed as well. Users can edit or even disable the JavaScript in the browser. So we can use that to create a nice user experience and to kind of show different parts of our application based on the authentication status, but we can't control or validate the authentication status in the browser. That has to happen on the server, so in a place where the users of our application can't do anything. Now, if you think about a traditional web application where the server would render pages for different URLs you enter, so where the server would render different HTML pages for the different URLs, you would work with a session. But remember that with Angular, we build single-page applications. That means we also decouple the front end, the Angular application, from the back end. For the different pages we visit, that all gets handled by Angular and its router. JavaScript in the browser takes over and re-renders pages or parts of pages as our user interface and the current state of the user requires it. We still reach out to the backend, as you learned in the HTTP modules. We can still interact with a server, but that server will be a RESTful API. And therefore will not use a session because RESTful APIs are stateless. The same would be true for GraphQL APIs, by the way. The core thing is that our backend, our server, will be an API. It will not be a server that renders the HTML pages we're on, and therefore sessions can't be used because our server doesn't care about the client. Client and server are decoupled from each other. They communicate through the HTTP client Angular offers, but besides that, there is no connection. The server doesn't know our client, so to say. And therefore, a session is no solution. A session would be stored on the server, and as I just said, the server doesn't care about our client. Instead, we'll use a different approach where the server will validate the user email and password, and if all that data is valid, the server will send the client a token, a JSON web token typically. That is an encoded string which contains a lot of metadata, and that string is encoded, not encrypted. That's important, which means this string could be unpacked and read by the client. More importantly though, that string, that token, is generated on the server with a certain algorithm and a certain secret which only the server knows. And only the server can validate incoming tokens for their validity. Because the idea is that the client, which is our browser, our Angular app, stores that token in some storage, like the local storage of the browser, and attaches the token to any request that thereafter is sent to the server, which needs to be authenticated. So let's say we need to be authenticated to store recipes. We then need to attach that token in the header or as a query parameter to that request we're sending to the server, so to that store recipes request. Now the server is able to validate that token because the server did create that token with a certain algorithm and a certain private key, which is only known to the server. That is how the token is secured. We can't generate or edit the token on the client because as soon as we do that, it will not fit the algorithm and private key used on the server, and the server is therefore able to determine that that token is invalid, and the server can therefore block access. This is why this is secure, because the server knows more than the client, but we give the client one important piece which is required to authenticate subsequent requests. But that piece is given by the server, it can't be generated on the client for the security reasons I just stated. Now that's the theory. It will become clearer if we simply start implementing it. And that, of course, starts with offering a user interface where users can enter their credentials, where they can sign up and where they can log in. And thereafter, we'll step by step add the logic to create such a token, store such a token, attach such a token to requests, and so on. So back in the project, it's time for new components or for new routes. Because thus far we have our recipes and we have our shopping list area. We now need some area where we can sign in. And my idea here is that in our application here, we have an auth page, an authentication page, where users can sign up and log in. And that auth page is, of course, available in an unauthenticated state. So the user doesn't need to be logged in to visit that auth page, because forcing the user to being logged in would defeat the purpose of an authentication page, right? The recipes page, on the other hand, that page should be locked down and should not be available if the user is not logged in. And the same for that manage dropdown. It should only be shown if the user is logged in, because otherwise we can't interact with that. Or we could, but these actions shouldn't do anything, because that will actually change to requests that need authentication to work. The shopping list should always be accessible, though of course you are free to also edit this and lock both routes down if you're not authenticated. With that, let's start by adding a new area in this application, which I'll create here in my app folder, which I'll name auth. And in there, we need an auth component.ts file and an auth.component.html file, which is the template for the auth component. Now, in our auth component TypeScript file, we export a class, auth component, and as you learned, such a component is created by adding the add component decorator. And there we need to define a selector, which in my case here will be app auth. And we also need to tell Angular where to find our template. And that, of course, will be my auth component.html file in the same folder as this component lives. Now, as you also learned, a component needs to be declared such that Angular understands it. And for this, we can go to the app module. And here we simply add it to our declarations array, the auth component. Simply add it here and make sure you also add an import path to that newly created file. With all of that out of the way, this new component exists. Now, of course, we can work on that template here. And for this, I'll add a bootstrap row, so a div with class row, and a column XS12 to take the full width on all screen sizes. And in there, I want to have a form, and that form should be my, well, sign up and log in form, and we'll add a button that allows the user to toggle between both modes. In the form, I'll add my form group div, which is a bootstrap class, to wrap a label and an input together, basically. And I will then add a label here for my email input, let's say. That also means that here we should add an input with class form control so that it looks good, because the class form control is offered by Bootstrap. And I will give this my email type here. It will also get the ID of email for accessibility reasons, so that this belongs to this label. And with that, we should have that first input. Let's now add a second input. This will be the input for the password. So the for, type, and ID here will all be password. Type password ensures that the characters are hidden. And we also need a button, of course. So let's add another div here with a button, which also gets the class button primary, where we can say sign up for now, and this will later also dynamically change the text based on the mode we're in. Because for that, I will add another button in another div below that, and there I will simply say switch to login, which of course later will also have a dynamic caption. And with that, let's make sure we can see that by ensuring that we can load this component or this component route here. And for that, in app routing module, I want to register a new route which loads the auth page. So here we can register a new path, which can just be auth. The name is up to you though, or the path is up to you, which you want to use. And there, the component I want to load will be the auth component. And for that to work, you need to make sure that you add the import path up there to the auth component. If you now save all of that and you enter /auth here, this is the form we're getting. Doesn't look too bad. Of course, you can change the styling. Actually, I will change it a little bit. There are a couple of things I'm not liking. I want to add more distance, more spacing between these two buttons here. or actually move them in the same row, like this maybe. Yeah, that looks better. And also reduce the width of that a little bit on bigger devices. So there I want to work with colMD6, which is a Bootstrap class, which gives us a more narrow column. And I want to add an offset of 3 so that this is nicely centered. Yeah, so here that looks better. This is it. This is the form we'll work with. Now, of course, we later also will add logic to make sure that we automatically are redirected to the off page if we're not logged in, and we can't visit recipes if we are not logged in. But for now, we'll manually go to that off page here. One thing I will already add, though, is in the header, a new link that allows us to go to that off page. Let me replicate the shopping list link here. And now that first shopping list link will go to the authenticate route. So the text is authenticate. The route or link points at /auth, therefore. And if we save that, now we can go to that route with that navigation link here. Perfect. So this is the basic setup with which we'll start. Of course, we're far from being done, because whilst we have this page now, the work just starts. And as a first step, let's make sure we can switch between login and sign up mode here. And thereafter, let's add the logic to actually sign up users and log them in.